The president of the National Association of Realtors recently released a short but informative video explaining the settlement and the changes that will be implemented going forward and how it's going to affect real estate agency. Now, in the meantime, since this NAR settlement announcement, I've seen so much speculation and nonsense and just complete misunderstandings on what the implications are and how it's going to affect agency in the future. Now, I don't think it's going to have a huge impact. I think there'll be small changes, but the industry will adapt. So this video, now, although it was short, I've edited it down even shorter just to hit the key elements that are going to affect how agents do business. So let me start the video and I'll make some comments throughout it.
I just want to let you know there was no perfect option. And once the verdict came down, we were left with three options. The first option, appeal. We would have had to post up to a $5.4 billion bond, which the National Association of Realtors just did not have the resources to do. That could have forced us to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And at the end of the day, bankruptcy was just not something that we could do to the association.
So he's just setting the stage on how the settlement came to be so that the people that hear this understand or aren't bitter about the fact that NAR didn't really have an alternative. If they were subjected to the judgment amount or even paying the bond to appeal it, it could have bankrupted NAR and potentially ended NAR. So it really forced them into a settlement that would need to ultimately be something that they could afford. And that's what happened. So that's how it came to be. Now he's going to move on and discuss about what changes are going to go in effect, the financial side of making that payment obligation, but also the rule changes that agents are going to have to adhere to.
So that leaves settlement. Now in the settlement, there are a couple of key pieces. One is financial, the other is rules. The association has agreed to pay $418 million over the next 4 years. The leadership team and the finance committee will be looking into how we can make sure that we not only meet the obligation to pay that amount, but we continue to be able to provide the tools, resources, programs, and advocacy.
So this is a big one because now we know we have a figure, $418 million, to be paid over 4 years. But he says, hey, we're still trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out how we can pay this. Now, of course, everyone that's paying NAR dues is wondering, does this mean a special assessment? Are dues going to go up? Does NAR have to take on long-term debt to pay a shorter-term obligation? I mean, maybe, so he's saying they're still figuring it out. Now, they either know how they're going to do it and they're trying to figure out how to make the pill easier to swallow, or they truly haven't figured it out what that's going to look like and they're still evaluating options. Either way, nothing official is being said in terms of how that $418 million tab is going to be picked up. Now, NAR's a nonprofit, it's got to be paid by someone, so the members are going to have to shoulder the burden. The question is, to what extent? And I think they're working on polishing up whatever it's going to be before they deliver the news.
Now let's talk about the rules, and there's two in particular. The first is that we will be changing the rule that will prohibit the offer of cooperating compensation on the MLS. You will still be able to offer compensation to a buyer broker. It just cannot be conveyed on the MLS. And if there's one thing I know about members, they will figure out how to efficiently communicate the information to see if there will be any cooperating compensation.
Now, this is important because it's looking very likely that the MLS will not allow listing agents to post a cooperating broker compensation on it. I don't think this is that big of a deal, to be honest. And I think that this video is actually a good thing because NAR leadership is doing exactly what they should be doing. And I commend this person for making the video, even though I'm a huge critic of NAR. This was the right thing to do because this is very reassuring to agents. He's saying, look, there's not going to be a cooperating broker compensation listed on the MLS, but that doesn't eliminate cooperating broker compensation. That doesn't eliminate a listing broker or even a seller offering to pay a buyer's agent. It just can't be displayed on the MLS. And this already exists now, even though this implementation will not take place until the summer, or at least that's the tentative timeline. Right now, and I just did a video on this, you can see that there are 0% cooperating broker compensation offers. And then the agent has written in the agent remarks instructing the buyer's agent to simply write in that the seller shall pay the buyer's agent broker or buyer's agent broker's commission. So just like you write in a seller's credit or requesting a seller's credit in an offer, where you write the offer and then you also write that the seller is going to credit the buyer $5,000 towards closing costs or something, the same thing can be done with buyer's agent commissions. Now, let's say a worst case scenario and the MLS doesn't allow a listing agent to write that in agent remarks. That doesn't matter either, because this will be common practice. It'll be common practice that a buyer's agent is going to ask someone, either the listing broker or the seller, to shoulder the burden of the commission if the buyer's not paying. And this is just going to get worked out through trial and error, and eventually there'll be a new streamlined process that agents in the future won't even think about in terms of how they get paid representing a buyer.
The second rule is that if you are a Realtor MLS participant, you will need to make sure you have a written agreement when you are representing a buyer.
Now, so this is the other side of it. If you're a buyer's agent, and I think it'll be one question that needs to be answered is, at what point does that does it constitute in the process a requirement to have that buyer's broker agreement, buyer representation agreement? Because he's saying in the future, if you work with the buyer, and this was spoken about on the MLS webinar as well, they said if you're a member of the MLS, which all realtors are, they go hand in hand, then you're required to have a buyer representation agreement. And of course, a buyer representation agreement stipulates the buyer's going to pay you a certain commission amount. So the question is, at what point in the process do you need to do it? The second you talk to a buyer on the phone before you show a first home, brokers are going to have to figure this out. I'm sure there'll be a NAR best practices released. But when this happens, one question I have is, do you have to use the current buyer representation agreement? I just did a video on a 2-page agreement. I'll make a 1-page buyer representation agreement. The idea of using the current, so here in California, the CARS buyer representation agreement is a little bit distressing because that form is cumbersome. It's too long, it's overwhelming, and it's going to freak some buyers out. There needs to be a light version of that form. Now, it's actually a good thing. And he goes on. Now, the video, I've edited out the rest of it because it's just kind of warm and fuzzy after that. But the point's already been made. And he goes on to explain that NAR has long advocated for a buyer's agent to use a buyer representation agreement. So this is a good thing. And I actually do agree with that. I think there needs to be more structure where a buyer can't just be as dismissive with an agent. They need to have some sort of gesture of commitment, of loyalty that's built where they're engaging in a professional relationship with the buyer's agent. So those are the two big rule changes. Buyer's agents must have a buyer representation agreement, and there's no offer for MLS offer for buyer's agent commission on the MLS. But like he said, and I think this is very reassuring, and it's one of the reasons why I'm glad this video exists. He says, look, just because it's not displayed on the MLS doesn't mean the commission doesn't exist. And he even says, I'm confident agents will be able to communicate what that commission is, because he knows that agents talk and they figure things out. They're very resourceful. So that's it. That's my take on this video. I would ignore all the other nonsense, the doomsday talk, or talking about switching to an hourly fee or any other nonsense notion. Very little changes are happening. But workarounds will be instituted. So just think about the workarounds and follow the example set forth by this video that he released, because I think it's quite informative. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Thank you for watching.